This little amp is an alternative to the 60s scoop tone that is known for the Fender blackface amps, but this is a similar but different take on that, and it crunches up like nothing that ever came from Fender. Hey everyone, this is Carlos from Amalgam Audio, and in this episode of Storytime we're going to take a look at the Gibson GA-5 Crestline amp. So this little amp is a Gibson GA-5 Skylark Crestline era. It is deceptively different configuration than the earlier model that also is called the GA-5 Skylark by Gibson. That one comes in cream ToneX. This one is an entirely different design. This is, as opposed to the cream ToneX version, a push-pull amp. The cream ToneX one is a single-ended amp. This one puts out about 10 watts, and it is a very, very bright amp. Especially if you turn it on the lower settings, it thins out and gets piercingly bright, but once you crank it up, it starts to crunch up really beautifully, and you can get some amazing tones with humbuckers. The Gibson amp history is actually a very interesting one. They had a lot of models released. It's actually not that easy to cover all the eras and all the variations of each of them. The oldest versions used to be tweed covered, similar to Fender amps. Then they had a brown ToneX era, cream ToneX era. The Crestline stuff came in this brown wood-like texture ToneX. And although you read on the internet that a lot of those designs were copies of one or another Fender model, for example, they sound very different than the equivalent amps by Fender. And often that is because there are maybe minor design changes. Such a minor thing as a change in the voltage can result in a radically different sound that's already enough to change it completely. And with simpler amps like the single-ended stuff, if you change one or two capacitors, it already sounds very different than the other stuff. The sound in the room of this amp might sound a bit like a broken radio, but you have to be really careful with miking it up. So you have to find where the center of the speaker is, which is approximately here. And from there you have to go way out to the cone, and that would be the best place to mic this one up because it has a lot of treble content. And if you do that with this amp, you can get a really huge recorded sound that will sound almost like the big stack Marshalls, Hi-Watts and whatnot. As I announced some time ago, for Amalgam this will be the year of small amps and large amps, and I went on a small trip on a purchase spree to buy the small amps, and I got a Gibson GA-5 Skylark, the cream ToneX version, which is a single-ended 5-watt amp, and I was very intrigued to hear how different the Crestline era amp sounds, so I got one of those too, assuming that this is a similar design, a single-ended small 5-watt amp. It turns out it is actually a completely different design. It is a push-pull amp. It has two output tubes, and it is way bigger power compared to the small one, and it has way more output compared to the cream ToneX version. So yeah, don't be misled by model numbers or names of a brand. Very often, especially actually also with Gibson, they change the designs constantly and tweaked it, and even if you find a schematic for a particular amp, it might be a slightly different version than what you assume it might be. But in a similar vein as the very simplistic single-ended amps that are mostly intended for practice, this is also a very basic design, the absolute minimum that you need. Similar to the simplistic single-ended designs, this amp has only two controls, and actually one of them is an on-off switch, which just turns on the amp, and the only actual control is a volume control. That's all you get. And with this amp, when it is on a clean setting, like on 2 or slightly above, it is an extremely piercing, bright sound that I find quite unusable, especially if it's in the room. You can salvage that with some miking up techniques if you go outside of the center of the speaker and get the darker sounds. And another thing to do is you could move in as close as possible to the cone with the speaker so that you get the proximity effect going, so you will have just a bigger punch and more massive sound. So that's some ways how to salvage a very bright sound. But this amp starts to really come to life when you dial it up to 5 or above, which is where it already crunches up. It loses a lot of that brightness due to compression, and you have a really nice crunch tone with Les Paul or any other humbucker guitar. And this amp gravitates more towards humbuckers because of the inherent brightness. With single coils you have to be really careful. You would probably dial back the tone control a bit so that it is not as piercingly bright. You can get some usable tones with a Strat, but you have to be really careful. I'll play a few licks on the Gibson GA-5 with my trusty Yamaha SA1000. Fabian will play us out on the captures we made of this little beast. Like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and see you around.